Hello, everyone. I'm excited to introduce Harry Mitsidis, who is the founder of Nomad Mania and also one of the very few people on earth to have visited every UN nation, not once, but twice. You are an author, you're a linguist, you are a pioneer, I would say, in the world of extreme travel in a way. And you have turned that passion into such a lovely community through Nomad Mania. So I would like to welcome you first to my podcast, the 193 Perspective. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Myrtle. The pleasure is all mine. It's really nice to meet the younger generation of future legends and travelers. So that's really great.
Yes, it's also you serve as inspiration to all of us, and we wish to walk on the same footsteps as you as well in the future. So
Yeah. Well, it's really good to be here. So go ahead, ask me whatever you want. I'm really curious to see what your questions will be.
yes, so before I get into the hard-hitting questions, I would want to know about your origins and how you started to travel. You were born in London to Greek father, South African mother. You studied sociology and then worked as a lecturer. Like you have had a very fascinating early life. So how did that shape your approach to seeing the world? How did your journey with travel begin?
Mm. Well, look, I think because I was born to parents from two different countries, I think I was conscious of differences in culture, differences in language, differences in behavior from a very young age. And as a child, I lived in Greece, but we would visit my grandparents in the UK very frequently. And so, I became a fan of aviation at a very young age. I knew all the airlines and all the planes, and my idea of a good time when I was 5 was just to go to the airport. So I guess the seeds were sown very early on. And then back at that time, I would say my parents were travelers as
Mhm.
well. They enjoyed exploring. We went to my mother's from South Africa, so we took a trip to South Africa when I was 10, which was a big adventure for me. And then my mother's sister lives in the United States, so we took a trip there when I was a child. And then we visited Asia when I was a teenager. And back in the 80s, for Europeans to go to Thailand and Singapore and Hong Kong, this was wow, it was really exotic. It was not like now when, most of us have more experience with these
Mhm.
countries.
Mhm.
Then they were totally unknown. So I think even as a child and as a teenager, I was very curious about the world. But of course, at the time, I neither had the role models nor the character to really travel like I have recently. I had a pretty ordinary life back then. I went to university. I had normal interests that university students have. Occasional trips. I took a couple of trips to the States.
Mhm.
I took a trip to Denmark on my own to visit a friend of mine who had gone there to study on exchange. So, those were kind of the first uh, trips that I did on my own. I wasn't scared of getting onto a plane on my own or anything. But, I would say that when I was your age, I had visited fewer countries than you have now, probably. So I think it just started gradually. As I finished my studies, I think more than anything, I think I rejected the model of working 9 to 5, getting an office job and spending
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
rest of my life there. I think I always appreciated freedom more. And I think this is the thing, the fact that I always needed freedom and this freedom of movement, freedom to go where I want when I wanted. I think that is probably the key element of personality, I would say, which then got me to want to explore and experience a bit more. And it's like a drug. The more you do, the more you want to do. And as I said,
Absolutely.
I had always liked aviation. I always liked looking at maps. So I knew my geography. I knew the countries of the world and everything. Um, and yeah, I mean, gradually the number of countries I visited grew without any particular plan. Um, and then the plan began, something like that.
So the 193, it became, when did it become a goal rather than just, an idea?
Well, I don't think it was even an idea. I mean, back in my 20s, and this was before Facebook, before the internet explosion. So, I had heard of no one who had done every country. This was not available information. It was not something that I ever imagined. I think the key moment was when I visited Afghanistan. I had
Mm-hmm.
always been fascinated by Afghanistan. I cannot explain why. I think when I was learning the airlines when I was a child, the Afghan airline was called Ariana. It still is. The national airline is called Ariana, Afghan Airlines, and I think the name Ariana, I don't know, it sounded like a nice name. And I like the color of the planes. They used to have these Boeing 727s in the blue and white logo. And so somehow I was always fascinated by Afghanistan. And then of course it was this forbidden place where you can never go, with all these wars and whatever. And then in 2003, it was possible to go. Things had changed there. And although it was relatively early in my travels, I went. Well, relatively early. It was my 100th country. So,
Wow.
it wasn't that early, but it also wasn't that late, given when many other travelers do Afghanistan. So, and I really wasn't doing countries to do the countries until then. I was just exploring. I did one long trip in the Caribbean, and there's many countries. So the numbers were up, but it was mainly Europe, some of the Americas. I had still not really touched Africa. There was a lot of Asia I didn't know. But I think when I did Afghanistan, then somehow I said, well, wow, I've been to this, so I should do them all. If I can do Afghanistan, which is so hard. And I think that is when I kind of made the decision consciously to do every country, and that was in 2003. So I was already 31. I wasn't that young, but it took me what, 4.5 years, and it was done. I had done 193. Yeah.
That is so inspirational, and it's such a wonderful thing. And I also relate with your thing as well, with that aviation and that obsession with maps, because that's what happened with me as well. I also love looking at airlines coming on. Whenever I used to be in the airport, I used to be in front of the glass trying to see which airline is coming in and which is taking off and try to identify them. So that was also a big trigger for me as well.
Right, right, yeah.
And
Well, we all of us, regardless of our age, we do have things in common. I think this is quite, it's quite usual to be a bit of a geek and just have a good time looking at the map and discovering cities and roads and connections. I think many of us have that in common. Yeah.
absolutely. Like you said, you finished all the countries at around age 36 or something like that. Yeah. So, travel, to especially 193 can be demotivating. It can be hard. What were some like difficult moments, in the journey that people don't usually hear about because I'm sure they are there for especially travelers like you.
Mm. Oh, yeah, yeah, there definitely are. Look, I think it depends a lot on the type of traveler you are.
Yeah.
I'm an introvert, I'm quite reflective, and I'm also a person who needs a normal life. There are travelers out there who only travel, they
Hmm.
live out of a backpack. and this is their life, and they don't have a home, and they just go. And in many ways, I admire those people because they are really free, but for me, that kind of freedom would maybe be imprisoning. I need a home. I need my family, my friends. I need a certain routine. I need to do normal things like going to the cinema, kind of things that some travelers don't do at all. So, needing that, I think sometimes when I was on the road, I was thinking of what I'm sacrificing in order to be able to travel. And maybe sacrifice sounds like a very hard word, but I do believe that um, I have lost time with friends, which I could have had otherwise. There have been moments on the road when it has been very lonely, and especially earlier. Now I don't feel the loneliness so much anymore. But back then, when I was doing 193 the first time and I was single at the time, I think often I would feel very empty, and I would often question, why am I really doing this? What does it really bring me? And especially when I hit some of the African countries where the experience is also harder, where it's very hot, and there's like maybe less joy and more hassle, if I can say it that way. I think these negative feelings sometimes took over. There was one point I remember when I nearly gave up. I think it was in Tanzania, and I had had a really bad day, and one bad thing happened after another, and I was like, you know what, this is just, it's not worth it. Why am I doing this? I can just be
Hmm.
home. I can go to the Maldives and rest and enjoy a holiday on a hammock and not not need to do this. But I guess in the end, both having the goal and being obstinate and not wanting to give up and being curious, all these things together uh, pull you through, and you do. I mean, I think most people who aim for it end up completing it because there's all these factors that push them even through these negative moments.
That is so very true. And also, I wanted to ask, as you mentioned a bit about loneliness, was most of your travel solo?
I have always traveled solo. When I did 193 the first time round, with the exception of Bhutan, where I had a tour, so I had guides, but again, I
Yes.
was solo. And then North Korea, where I had to join a tour, and then we were a group. Uh, those were the only exceptions where I did it in a group, and also one trip to Syria, but I had done Syria before. So I had already been to Syria, and then I took a group trip to Syria. But otherwise, I did everything solo. And I mean entirely solo. I never had guides. I planned it all on my own. I did whatever I did on my own. I used public transport. So, I back that was then. I mean, now I don't recognize the younger me. I'm like, wow, that was really something, because now I many of my trips are with Nomad Mania, because now we've turned into
Yeah.
conducting trips. So now my trips are much more sociable, and they get me out there and I meet people, and then once you know them, you meet them again and they become friends. So it's a much more sociable experience. But I don't regret having done it solo, because I think you can only really experience a place when you're alone. If you're with others, and especially with others who are from your own country or your own background, I think the experience is diluted. It's not as authentic as it is when you're all alone.
I also took my first solo trip last year. Yeah, I went to Japan, and it was such an enriching experience. It was such a lovely experience, and I cherish it so much. And you're very right, wandering the streets without having any side conversations or something like that. It's a different experience altogether.
Yeah, and Japan is a very good country to do that, because Japan, culturally is unique and extremely, it's a very strong culture. So wherever you are, you feel Japanness about it, but it's also extremely safe. So, you don't have the worries that you often have in other countries. So Japan is a very good place to wander about on your own, I think.
That's exactly the same I felt. Also, when you finished 193 the first time, how did it actually feel? Did you land? Did finishing bring some clarity, or did it create some kind of uncertainty about what comes next?
No, no, I think it was a big anticlimax. So I finished I had a relatively easy time doing
Hmm.
193. I consider myself one of the luckiest people seeing what some others have to go through, especially now. But back then I never had significant visa issues. And I left Africa. I literally did 47 African countries back to back in 2007. And then I left myself with Angola, Malawi, and Equatorial Guinea. They were my last three. And Equatorial Guinea was the difficult one. I had quite a lot of difficulty getting that visa, but again, relatively easily, I got it. And before I knew it, I was there because I was trying to get it. And at one point, I was like, I'm going to be waiting for years until I get to Equatorial Guinea. And then we found a contact and I managed to get the business visa and I was there within a week. And so then I landed and I'm like, I've done it. Oh, wow, I've done it. But I was alone. There was no one to really share it with. There was still no traveler community. So I had no other traveler friends. I didn't have anyone to celebrate with. I remember I sent my normal friends, if I can call them like that, my non-traveler friends, I sent them an email
Yes.
and I said, I reached Equatorial Guinea and I've now done every country. And for them, it didn't really mean anything. I mean, they thought I was crazy to begin with. They always asked me, why are you doing this? So I think it was an anticlimax. Of course, there was a feeling of completion and satisfaction, but the big question was, what now? What other goals do I have? Because when you're goal driven and when you structure your travels that way, then that doesn't stop with 193. And in fact, Nomad Mania exists mainly because of that. Because I think I reached that point when I was like, okay, so I've done every country. Do I feel like I've seen the world? No. I mean, I didn't feel like I'd seen that much, and I certainly didn't feel like I understood the world that well. So I think that is where the idea of creating something bigger and a bigger list, a more challenging list, something that would really reflect the world and make people understand the countries deeper. That is the point where it kind of started developing.
That's a great segue, and I would like to just talk a bit about Nomad Mania as well. So, Nomad Mania, just for the listeners or readers, is a community of travelers, and there are 101 regions which Nomad Mania has plotted, and you can select which ones you have been, which ones you should go to. Their travel communities. You can ask for help. You can read about people's the journeys. It's a really great community for travelers who want to not just travel superficially, but who want to travel deeper, is what I feel when I first joined Nomad Mania. So, what point did you realize also that that extreme travel space also needed some structure, some definitions, things like that?
Well, I don't like to even call it extreme travel. I think Nomad Mania now, but even at the beginning, I wouldn't call it extreme travel. I'd just call it deep travel. Some of it is extreme. Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're going to a danger zone, this is extreme. But I don't think exploring off the beaten track places in Chile is extreme, or I don't think anything in China is extreme. And you may end up in a place where there really are no foreigners and you're the only one. But, I don't think China is extreme in any way. It's very interesting, and it has a lot of culture and history. So I think the word extreme is sometimes used against us in that it overemphasizes the danger. It
Hmm.
overemphasizes some of the countries, which are often harder to go to, places like Sudan, Yemen, Afghanistan. They are the ones that the travelers are always talking about. But, what about a country like Algeria? What about a country like Namibia? What about a country like Tajikistan? I don't think these places are
The
extreme.
extreme, absolutely, yeah.
They're very interesting. And Nomad Mania serves as a way to guide you to the places you should be going to in these countries. So our division into regions is there as an idea. Don't just go to the capital. There's more to see. And sometimes that more is actually what really helps you understand the country, because I personally think that capitals are never representative. It's always the more rural areas, the off the beaten track ones, where you can really understand what a culture is like. So that is what Nomad Mania aims to do for people who like traveling deeper and with a better sense of understanding.
That's so true, and also Nomad Mania has set some good has set some has a verification process, not just counting stopovers. So it's actually for people who want to travel deeply and who want to understand the place, not just check boxes in a way.
Yeah, I mean, how should I put it? There are travelers out there who only want to get a tick, and some people travel, I think, more because of the list rather than because they actually want to explore and have an experience. I don't want to judge people, everyone should be traveling in the way that makes them happy. So if someone enjoys just ticking, that's fine. But we're here to serve all the travelers, and our verification is there to ensure that the criteria are clear and that people are trying to get the most out of their travels rather than just going there, claiming a place because they crossed the line and then going back and not really understanding anything. So, yeah, it's all about learning more about the world. And then in the process, you learn more about yourself as well.
Absolutely. What can I ask? What have you learned about yourself through this journey? What has some changes which have brought?
Right. Well, look, I always thought that I was very impatient as a person, but I think traveling has taught me patience, both the aim of doing 193, uh, but also, during your travels, there's always going to be so many difficulties. I'm by nature, you can call me even compulsive. I like to plan things. I like to have a very clear schedule. I like to do things on time. I don't like delays. And obviously, traveling throws these things at you. And you can either have a nervous breakdown or you can learn to embrace them and, in a way, change and become calmer. So I think that I have become a calmer person because of traveling. I think I've become a more patient person because of traveling. And I also think I've become a more positive person. I'm more accepting of differences. I grew up in Greece, which is a relatively conservative country, especially back in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up. It was a very conservative and relatively inward looking country back then. So, traveling has helped me not only understand the world, but also open up as a person. So I can only see good changes. I don't think that travel can result in negative changes to a person who approaches it in the right way.
That's so insightful, and I always feel that people should travel more because they'll discover more of themselves, they discover more of the world, and it's all whenever I go back to a place, or even if I go out in my own country or wherever, I always come back and I've always learned something more. I've always discovered something more about myself. So that's my perspective on it. Also, yeah,
Well, you have to be open to that, though.
yes.
I think this is what people need to realize. I do think that, and again, I don't want to generalize, but I think some of the so-called influencers who say,
Hmm.
I'm a big traveler, they advertise themselves as world travelers, but in reality, they're just sometimes looking to make the catchiest video that'll get the most likes.
Most likes. Yeah.
That is not traveling really. I mean, it might be an angle of traveling, but I think to a certain extent, you need to be open to the place rather than impose your own vision of the world to the place, or have a desire of taking from the place rather than giving back. That is the way I see it. If you're making videos about a place which you're using to monetize or to increase your fame, I would ask myself, well, am I giving back to this place in equal measure? Am I at least making sure that it's represented well? Am I at least making sure that people are going to become interested and curious about the place, so maybe I'll bring more visitors? There has to be a bit of a balance there. And from my perspective, because I've never been someone doing videos and digital
Yeah.
stuff, I don't
Yeah.
see myself that way. But from my perspective, just being um, a kind traveler in a place is my contribution. I'm always curious. I smile. I try to talk to people. I show that I'm well-meaning and that I like their country, even if sometimes I need to stretch the truth because I don't like every place, obviously, but I'll always try to be complimentary so that people feel valued and that they feel that even in some places, they feel my place may not be so bad, because there are countries where people feel that their country is not good, and I see it as my role to reassure them. So I think when you're a traveler, it's important to travel in a good way, and that will then also teach you to be a better person.
That's a very beautiful thing to say. Just spread kindness, and it's a really nice thing. And but you had also said back then there was no social media, but today the travel today is very visible online. So do you think social media has helped people explore meaningfully, or has it made it more superficial? People are just sometimes, I feel, they're not chasing authentic experiences, but just because they saw a reel or just because they saw an image, they want to recreate that and go there for likes. So I don't know, I don't understand that side of it. What's your view on that?
Well, I think just like most things in life, it isn't black and white. Everything is gray, and a lot depends on how you consume social media. I do think there is a positive angle in that people can learn about places they would otherwise have never heard of. So there is an angle of awareness and education. And for sure, social media and Instagram and all these channels help people learn more. The problem is when they learn, or when what they think they learn is not actually true. When they see an image which is not real. But I think a lot there has to do with how you consume the material. I'm always cautious when I see something. I try to double check. But I have, even I have got inspiration for places to visit thanks to social media. So I'm inclined to think it's a good thing, but one should always approach it cautiously. Double check your sources. When you read something, never believe it at face value. Make sure it comes from a reliable source. And then, keep an open mind and, yeah, make sure you're learning. Mm.
Absolutely. Recently, I got an inspiration. I was scrolling on Instagram and I saw a beautiful image of Socotra Island in Yemen.
Yes, that's a
So,
fantastic place.
yeah, so I just saw that place and I was stunned. And it was, I didn't heard of it. I had not known it existed, but now it's again on top of my bucket list. So
It should
sometimes,
be. It should
so
be. Socotra is one of my best surprises. It is a really special place. So when you go, you will see for yourself. Anyone who goes there is lucky, I will say.
so sometimes, it's also for the good, I feel. It's also for the good. Uh,
Yeah.
one more thing which I really like about Nomad Mania is the slow score which you give. That's a unique one because you're defining the number of days one must spend in a country to to go deeper. So, do you think long-term travel also makes people a bit more open-minded, or do you think it makes them a bit more judgmental? What's your view on long-term travel versus short-term travel?
Um, well, I personally think longer is better here.
Mm-hmm.
I think, especially in our travel community, historically there has been a tendency for people to do things too quickly, and I will even accuse myself of that. I feel that my first time round I was rushing. I had a goal and I wanted to reach 193, and I really rushed through this, and the result of that was that I didn't enjoy it as much as I could have, and I also didn't learn as much as I should have. I think slow um, I think if you're traveling slowly and if it's really traveling, then I think it's great. As long as you're enjoying the culture and the country, I would never suggest that someone travels slowly in a place that they don't like. And I think it's perfectly okay not to like a place because it just doesn't agree with your values or your character. Or you may not like some aspects of a place. And I think that's totally valid. Always being positive and saying everywhere is marvelous, that is not really possible. So I would say you don't need to always travel slowly if there's a particular place you just don't feel at home in. But in a place where you are enjoying it, I think slow will always be a pleasure. You will get to explore corners of it that you wouldn't have otherwise
No,
had time to do. Uh, and Nomad Mania, in a way, is devised to force you to do that. I mean, let's say you go to Colombia, which I believe has 8 regions. Well, you cannot do 8 regions in 5 days. It's not going to happen. You are
absolutely.
forced to go into it and delve into the deeper corners of it and do it slowly. Now, I think some people who do it slowly may be digital nomads, meaning that they stay in a country very long because they use it as a base. There, I think I'm not even sure we can talk about travel that much anymore, because if you're working or if you're spending the greater part of your time in the place and you're actually working rather than exploring, then I'm not sure I can define that as travel anymore. So I think there people might become more anxious, they may be staying in a place, but they're not really going around, and they would still get the slow score based on Nomad Mania because they have the number of days, but they're kind of in one city only working, and then they may not really enjoy it. They feel that they're too stationary. But I think in terms of travel and pure travel, slow is generally a good thing.
That's also very true. And you've divided. I was surprised to see even in India, like I've always grown up and I've read about 28, 29 states, but you've even divided the states into two or three parts, which is even pushing people to explore even more. You have divided it in such a way that you're not exploring by the boundaries set by the country or something like that. You're exploring even deeper than that. So that's also a very good thing.
Right. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, yeah, yeah. I'm a
Uh,
big advocate of the slow list, and it was very difficult to quantify something qualitative, because being a slow traveler is by definition about quality of travel, and we had to devise a way where we can get a number out of that, because otherwise the problem with quality, you cannot, how do you measure it? You can't measure quality. So I think we succeeded in terms of the number of days, although of course that obscures what you're really doing with those days. I mean, you could just be going to the Maldives for 2 weeks to an all-inclusive
yes,
resort,
the
and
resort,
you
yeah.
can still get your slow score. But fair enough. I mean, I think we should celebrate all kinds of different travels. So, yeah.
Absolutely. But I had one question, which is specifically for people, going to off the beaten path places. You have divided places like North Korea, Libya, Syria into many smaller regions. For people, it's very tough to even reach the country and visit the capital and things like that. How do you manage to visit the regions of North Korea, the regions of Libya? How did you manage to do it?
Well, to be very honest, North Korea was a piece of cake when I did it. So I visited North Korea twice, and then the second time, um, the second time I went on an aviation tour. And that aviation tour had us take all these old Soviet aircraft every day and fly to a different part of North Korea where we landed and then explored that area. And there you go. Just we went to these regions that, North Korea is
Yes.
generally shut now, but it was really easy. And when I did Syria before the war, that was in 2002, and then I visited again in 2005. There was no trouble. Syria was a totally normal country. Uh, I took a coach, I took an intercity bus and went from Damascus to Latakia. Then I did Palmyra on the tour. I mean, some places which are very difficult now were not that hard in the past. But I mean, the idea behind our division of regions is to represent countries with a number of regions that they need to be represented. Um, so we don't really look at if it's easy or difficult. The fact that it's easy or difficult is then a subjective interpretation. But we cannot say, well, North Korea is hard, so it only deserves one region, because it doesn't. It's a relatively sizable country, and based on our analysis, it deserves three regions. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to be fair, and from there on, we challenge people, if they're interested, to try to visit the other regions. And if they can't, again, I don't want people to think that they have to. This is not, travel should never be something you
Be
force
something, yep,
on others
absolutely.
or on yourself. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
of course, people want to, and many people like the challenge. So, admittedly, going to southeastern Libya was a challenge. That's the desert south of Benghazi, and that is a region I only managed to reach earlier this year. That was a really, really difficult trip, and no one had been to that region for at least 12 years before our little group made it there. So yeah, that took a lot of arranging and permits and transport. But I do believe that nothing is impossible if you have the will. So yeah.
That's also a great way to go about it. I I absolutely want to. I'll also go as much as possible to countries and visit them in the not the usual sense, go off the beaten path and try to explore the lesser known regions, because I feel a lot of culture and a lot of uh, you get a lot of depth in those places.
Mm.
But I wanted to ask you, as the traveler who's been to 193, some can you recommend some off the beaten path places for people who have just visited probably the popular countries or the popular places, what are some of the beaten path places you would recommend?
In terms of countries or in
Countries
terms
or
of.
places?
Okay, well, why don't I stick to countries since we're talking to
Yes,
one
yes,
country? I
yes.
really recommend Tuvalu. I think Tuvalu is a joy. Many people find it hard to get there because it's yeah, there's only flights from Fiji, and they sometimes get cancelled. But Tuvalu is probably one of the last places in the world where you will get this total feeling of everybody knows everybody, everybody greets you. Uh, when the plane is not coming, people are on the runway having picnics, and then in the afternoon they're playing football on the runway. It's this charming little country in the middle of the ocean in the Pacific, and I cannot recommend it enough. I think everyone should go. Eventually, probably Tuvalu will stop existing. It will be one of the first victims of global warming. So I'd say go now while you can. Another hidden gem that I discovered more deeply earlier this year, in fact, is Rwanda. Rwanda is a very optimistic example of how a country can make a turnaround after terrible events. So, as you probably know, there was a dreadful genocide there in
Yeah,
1994.
yeah.
1 million people were murdered. It was really tough. But now going to Rwanda, you find a country that is, for African standards, incredibly organized. They have traffic lights, they have radars, people respect the speeding limit. That's in Africa. That's quite incredible. And it's very green, it's very safe. And because Rwanda is hilly, it's generally cooler. So it's a really lovely country to explore. And for someone who, let's say, doesn't have much experience with Africa, I would say Rwanda is a very good entry point. It makes a good first destination before you venture into harder and more challenging places in Africa. Staying in Africa, I also really like Sao Tome and Principe. This is a former Portuguese colony. This is in the Atlantic Ocean near Gabon. This is also a very slow, lackadaisical country, very friendly, but also very African. You get a total African feel there. But it's really quaint. It's a very pleasant place to go to. So these are three countries that I think are not particularly well known, or and even in the travel community, because there's no real extreme element to them, they're not often mentioned, but I think they definitely deserve people's attention.
Absolutely. I also wanted to discuss a bit about your planning process. How do you balance planning and spontaneity, and what's your approach to when you think about a trip or something like that?
Right. Well, I admit that I'm no longer that spontaneous. I used to be more spontaneous. Nowadays, I am more of a planner, which means nowadays I tend to know where I want to go,
Mhm.
what I want to see. And Nomad Mania has helped with that as well, because now we have the tools, we have the series, which includes so many items of things you can see and do. So I
Yeah,
often study that in advance of planning a trip so that I create a route. I leave spontaneity more for things like where I'm going to eat, or maybe I leave a buffer day where I don't plan anything. And then, depending on my mood, I might on that day have an additional trip or maybe just stay where I am. But in general, I do like to plan. But one thing I don't do, I don't organize a trip very far in advance. So usually I'm only deciding I'm going to go somewhere maybe a month up to 6 weeks before I go. It's very much a last minute. I just now decided to go to Gambia uh, toward the end of January. So, this is only a month in advance, and I'm kind of looking into where I want to go, what I want to do. So, I would say that in that, I don't plan months or a year in advance as some of the other people do.
Absolutely. And also, were there some, while you were visiting all the places, were there some countries that you expected to dislike, but then you fell in love with them?
No, I never expect to dislike anywhere. I like to be open-minded. There are some countries where maybe I expected them to be harder, and then I was pleasantly surprised that they were not that hard. Burundi, for example, I had heard more negative things about Burundi, more scary things about Burundi, but in the end, it proved to be fine. There were no issues there at all. Um, well, to be honest, India is a country which has often surprised me in a positive way. I think many of us have an image of India being extremely hot, and that on its own is a difficulty for some of us. And then, of course, the traffic problems and some organizational problems. But then on the ground, I would say India is always an interesting surprise. There's always, I think India is the ideal place to just look at what's going on in the ground, and just observe the people. That's great. So, yeah, India is one of the pleasant surprises, I would say.
I'm glad that India could surprise you. Also, I feel India is also so different in all the different regions. And when I was looking at the classifications and I was looking at India only, I just realized how much it makes sense. I was looking at Italy as well because I was just in Italy a few months ago and I visited two of the Nomad Mania regions, and I was like, I can actually feel differences in the same country in the two different regions. So I think that's also a very important thing, that you realize more about a country and you can see the differences rather than just see the capital, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Well, I think if we're talking about India, India is really many different worlds. It's not just one. It's one country, but there's so many different, both geographically, but also culturally, so many different pieces to it. So, not dividing India into all the regions that we have would be a crime, really. I mean, you have to give India all these different regions and really urge people to do it. Going to Kerala is nothing like going up to Shimla or something, two totally different experiences. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Also, were there some crazy travel stories which you have, or something which is absolutely unexpected which happened?
Yes, there's a lot of crazy travel stories, Mridul. When you've been around the world like I have, half the things that happen to you are crazy. I mean, I don't know what kind of crazy do you want. I have spent the night in jail. I have been arrested for taking a photo I shouldn't have. I mean, if you look at that kind of crazy, uh, I have had wild nights out partying in certain destinations, and then I've had funny incidents happen to me on the street, like in the Philippines, I was walking down the road and the woman just comes up to me and says, "Will you marry me?" Just like that, So, random incidents with strangers, and then in the US, every day is crazy because some interaction is going to happen to you which is out of the ordinary, random people talking to you at Walmart, and then they notice that you're a foreigner and then they start going off on these rants. Traveling by definition involves crazy experiences. And that is, you need to look at them, even the bad ones, like going to jail, you need to be lighthearted about it and not take it too seriously. As long as you know that you haven't done anything that bad, usually things will turn out okay. Usually. Yeah.
Where were you arrested? In Fujitsu?
I was arrested in Yemen and in Libya.
Oh, oh, that's
Yeah, fun
crazy.
places, right? Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
crazy. but even some interactions I've had with other guests, they have been held imprisoned they have been held imprisoned for 48 days, 50 days in Syria or something like that. But it comes with risk. But again, you have to have a light heart. You have to have a light-hearted approach to it. You need to approach it positively. That's very important. Uh,
Absolutely.
I will not ask what your favorite country is because I feel that's the question you get the most often.
Yeah, and that's the one I dislike the most
Yeah, so
because
I'm
it
not
is
going.
so difficult to simplify the world that much. And I tend to always give a different answer, which proves that there isn't one definitive favorite. There are a number of countries I enjoy going to a lot and returning to a lot, but I think at the end of the day, when when you're an experienced traveler, you find the good everywhere. And I will say that
Absolutely.
Gambia is one of my least favorite countries, and that is exactly why I'm going there again. I want to understand why I ranked it so badly and to give it another chance. So I'm really hopeful that I'm going to find nice sides to it and enjoy it this time.
Absolutely. But since I'm not going to ask you what your favorite country is, because I also get the same question. I've been to about 50 countries and I can't pick one. And it must be four times as more hard for you because you've been to 193. So I'm not going to ask, but I'm going to ask which are some regions or some places, which have a special, which you really liked or for some specific reason, or some regions you can say, or some places. I don't want like a favorite, but just some random places which you really liked.
Well, look, of course there are. I think a lot has to do with your state of mind. To a certain extent, it might have to do with a memory. It may not always be related to the place itself. Uh, I find that when I've liked a place a lot, it's often linked to a person, uh, to, it could be a kiss, it could be a romantic dinner, it could be just a nice, friendly chat with someone who surprised you. And it's usually people that make a place stand out. So I think that is possibly why different people come up with all these different favorites because everyone has unique memories. So I don't think there is a definitive place. Obviously, if we're talking about natural beauty, some places are breathtaking, just by nature of geography. You have fantastic mountains. And I can say, for example, that I find the mountains in the north of Pakistan incredible. The area of Gilgit and around that. That is amazing. As are the mountains in Tajikistan, that Pamir Highway. Those totally blow me away. And then, you have other natural sites like in Namibia, you have the sand dunes which crash
It's
into the ocean.
mystery. Yeah.
That is truly one of the very impressive natural sites. So yeah, obviously some places are more beautiful than others, but I think if I'm thinking about my memories, they usually have to do with people. And I think this is where human beings prove that we're social beings. So no matter how much you travel and you explore, a place is just a place. It is the experiences you've had and what you've shared with other fellow humans that will make a place stand out more. And I think one of the reasons I mentioned Tuvalu is because in Tuvalu, everyone greets you. You end up talking with the locals, simple conversations, but you end up coming out of that with this feeling we're so different. We live in so different parts of the world, but here we are communicating, smiling, enjoying life. And this is very affirming. And this is what ends up creating an impression of a place.
Absolutely. But I wanted to ask again that you mentioned earlier in this conversation that you are an introvert by nature. How does being an introvert relate to this kind of travel? Because as you said, you're talking to locals, so it must be actually pushing you quite a bit out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, but I have forced myself to do that, and again, I wouldn't talk. Let me put it this way. I don't think there's a European country where I would stop and talk to a random stranger. I think in many ways, the environment influences your behavior very much. So, if I'm walking down the streets of Stockholm, I'm not going to stop a person, walking in the other direction and have a conversation with them. It's just not going to happen. But in a place like Tuvalu or in certain places in Africa, often people will stop you, if you look different and if you are, the outlier, others are going to be interested in you. And there I see that I am an ambassador of the world that I represent. I can, so I cannot be rude there and not want to talk to the people who want to talk to me. In some cases, they may just want money off me, but I'm still going to be polite. So, in those situations, whether one is or isn't an introvert, you just have to be bigger than that, and you have to prove that you're a worthy traveler ultimately. Yeah.
Mm, that's pretty good. I also wanted to end on this one question that for some as for young people who are trying to explore the world, for travelers who want to explore the world more deeply, what advice would you give to them to see the world more meaningfully, to see the world with and get a better perspective? What would you say to them?
Well, firstly, I would say you need to learn your own country. You need to learn more about where you're coming from, because when you're traveling, you're an ambassador. And that means others may ask you questions. And if you don't know the answers, you're letting them down. So you need to focus more rather than less on where you come from. You need to try to look at your own country very objectively, not through the eyes of what you're taught. You need to look at your country also through the eyes of an outsider. And travel can help you in that, because by going to other countries, you can compare more. You can see what other places have, which your country doesn't. And in that way, you can be maybe more objective. So I would say that is very important. And probably with that alone, you have a much better sense of your role as a traveler and who you are. So I would say that is number one. And number two, very important, you should always travel uh, with a positive mindset. Many travelers approach a country very negatively, and especially people aiming at 193, they'll be like, oh, I now have to do South Sudan, and they make a face and whatever. But that's the wrong approach. Yeah, okay, South Sudan is very poor, very complicated, and it's difficult, but you cannot start like that, because then obviously you're not going to enjoy it. You need to try to frame it always positively, always in a curious way. If you can't, you need to ask yourself why you want to go. You should only want to go because you want to learn and be positive about a place. So I think these two things, and keep the experience authentic. Don't make it all about the next video, the next like, the next reel. Be true to the place and to yourself. That's all I have to say.
Those are great pieces of advice, and it's been a privilege to hear your philosophy on travel, on life. Thank you so much for sharing your journey. I'll be very excited to see your future journeys, how you are going across the world, and which corner of the map we are going to be heading to next. Thanks for being here and taking out some time for this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Mridul. And I'm curious to see where your voyage will take you. So, yeah, I'll be watching you.
Thank you so much. I'm probably going to go to Tunisia and Malta next. So,
Nice. Okay.
so
Okay.
those are,
That's a good combination. They're very different. So,
so yeah, I'm excited. I heard there are a lot of similarities between Tunisia and Morocco. I really like Morocco. So I'm excited to go
Okay.
to Tunisia as well.
All right. All right. Yeah, similarities, but also differences. Well, I'm
Absolutely
sure
different.
you'll conclude
Absolutely.
on that on your own. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm very excited. Coming up little later than I have to travel a bit in advance because of my passport. So
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
slightly
but
weaker
don't
passport.
my advice is don't miss Algeria, which is in the middle there. Algeria is very interesting. So,
I'll keep that in mind. I'll try to. I'll see. I would love to do Algeria as well because I've heard many other travelers also mention Algeria as a hidden gem.
totally, yeah. Yeah.
I'm excited.
Algeria is, well, the problem with Morocco and Tunisia, they're both very, very touristy. And so the locals are much less interested in you. And if they are interested, it's probably not for the right reasons. Whereas in Algeria, which gets very few tourists, you really get all the authenticity, all the hospitality. The people are very, very interesting in Algeria. And it has so much culture, a lot of Roman ruins, and also a lot of diversity. You know, you've got the Mediterranean, you've got the mountains, the Atlas, and then you've got the desert. It's a really worthwhile trip. So
Wow,
yeah,
it'll be good if I could go to Algeria as well. I'm excited.
great.
Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. I really appreciate it.
Okay, Mriddle. Well, Merry Christmas and all the best to you for 2026. I
Thank
hope
you
it's a great
so
travel year
much.
for you.
Absolutely. Same wishes to you as well.
Okay, thanks.